Hello, and thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Professor Jason Whitaker, and I'm head of the School of English and Journalism at the University of Lincoln. It gives me immense pleasure this evening to welcome Carol Ann Duffy, who is one of the best loved and most well known of poets working in the UK, who has shaped a generation of readers and defined our attitudes to a whole host of subjects, both from personal and private love poetry to how we see the world around us in some of the public poetry she produced during her time as Poet Laureate. We're here this evening to announce the winners for the school's poetry competition that Lincoln had launched earlier this year, which was to inspire children and young people to use their imagination and become creative in response to the events which have shaped this year, a period of time like no other that we've seen. Throughout this evening, we'll be announcing the winners of these different poetry categories, which were between the ages of 9 and 11 through to 17 to 18 years. We hope that a number of you are able to join us. And during the evening, there'll be opportunities to hear the winning poems as they're read out, both by myself and Carol Ann. And also then some chance to ask questions or comments as we go along. Please do take an opportunity to join in and share your responses to the poems that we'll be reading out this evening. So, Carol, it's been a wonderful afternoon so far, just being able to talk to you about your own poetry. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about some of the things that you're reading today, but just more generally, how important is poetry during a time of crisis such as we've experienced over the past year?
Oh, hello, Jason. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be celebrating some young poets this evening. I suppose I first encountered poetry in childhood, and one way or another it's given me my life. I think I was very lucky with my teachers, both in primary and secondary school. Fantastic teachers who shared their love of poetry with me. And I think the older I've got, the more I've come to realize that two things about poetry. Firstly, it's the music of being human. So I think the University of Lincoln had a great idea during the lockdown and the pandemic of asking young people to write, you know, where and how they were in that year. And I think secondly about poetry is poetry only ever adds something to the world. Poetry is a giving. It doesn't take anything away from the world, it only adds to it. So to sing of our humanity and to give from that, I think is very important. And a poetry competition is a great way of drawing all that out of young people. Great thing to do in the classroom, lovely for teachers to encourage children to write. And nothing better than having your poem chosen, which is very special.
So we had a great number of entries. I mean, the response to this was fantastic. And so I was one of the judges, along with you, Carol Ann, that was able to read through many of the entries that were sent through. And it was incredible that sort of just how much people responded to this. One of the things that always gives me heart, whilst more of a reader of poetry certainly than one who writes it, it's always been incredibly important to me that sort of poetry through the ages, as you say, this music of being human. There was a comment I read recently that poetry is one of those acts, if you go back to the original meaning of the word, it's an act of creation, it's an act of making. And when you bring something into the world, as you say, the universe has to change itself to fit around this new thing. It makes us see everything in a very different way. And that kind of response and changing, not simply ourselves, but then how others respond to our words was, I think, one of the things that we were trying to encourage with this prize. So what I'd like to do now then is to go through the various entries and categories that people submitted to. And what I'll do is go through a number of the winners. There were 2 winners in each category. I'll be reading out the poems from each of the entries in turn, but also then Carol Ann will be reading the overall winner, the person who we judged was our favourite poem that came out of this competition. So turning then to the pandemic poetry competition for 2021, I'd like to go through the winners for each category in turn. And I'll start then with entries for 9 to 11 years old. And this is one of the things that's always a great joy for me. I've been involved in a number of poetry competitions over the years. And it's the sheer enthusiasm in which younger poets approach these tasks. That, you know, I think there's something almost natural about the desire to write poetry, which sometimes gets knocked out of us for I was going to say for better or for worse. It's never for better. So I'd like to announce that the two winners in this category were Edward Lammas with the Lullaby Tune and Abigail Silcox with Suds. And what I'll do for a moment now is I'll be reading through each of the poems and then just pause for a moment, particularly Carol Ann, if there's any comments that you'd like to make on those entries as well. So starting with Edward Lammas, the Lullaby Tune. Oh, lullaby tune, how delicately you sing to me. Take me to your world with peace and glory. Bring me away from this madness. Oh, lullaby tune, coronavirus is too much to handle. Lay me down in the comfort of your music. Enlighten my soul with music. Oh, lullaby tune, I love you. And that's by Edward Lammas, age 11, and one of the winners of our poetry competition this year.
That's so beautiful. It's got a kind of Shakespearean quality to it, hasn't it? You can imagine
Absolutely.
it being sung.
And there's always that gentle simplicity that just then makes it so singable, as you're just saying.
Beautiful, amazing for 11.
Exactly. So the second winner in this category was Suds by Abigail Silcox. I am a soap bottle, standing so still. On the bathroom windowsill, I'm always taken for granted, never feeling excited. But here I am being a hero, not feeling like I am a zero. And from downstairs I hear muffled moans, then the briefing brings never-ending groans. Sometimes it looks like Boris has ruined their life, but not for me. I'm a bottle of Suds in lockdown number 3. I am excited, never down. I feel like I'm a king with a crown. Everyone thanks me day and night because I'm a hero in the COVID fight. I know one day the pandemic will end, but I know that I would have never been a hero, helping people's normal lives get on the mend because I am a bottle of Suds. That's Abigail Silcox.
It just shows how you can make something by looking freshly at something very ordinary. And I like the kind of slightly gentle political satire that it has.
Yes. Starting young, certainly, and long may it continue as well. And actually, I say that sort of just taking the most mundane of items and actually giving that a voice to express what we're feeling.
And we talked a lot about being in a bubble, didn't we?
Yes. And also, the sharing the groans as to where are we now and what's happening in this. So those were the two winners of our category for 9 to 11 years old. And so there was a huge outpouring of poems in this age category. And it's always just a great pleasure to see just how naturally writing poetry comes to young people. So we move on now into the second of our categories. And these are the 12 to 13 years. And the winners in this category were Esther Kivuva, Kindness in COVID, and Elif Senso, If You Look Closely. And what I'm going to do for the moment, I'm just going to read out Esther's poem in this instance. So I'll just bring that up. So this poem is Kindness in COVID by Esther Kivuva. This is the time to be kind. Smile to the strangers while our lives lose promises. Try as best as you can, and don't let others pull you back. Scrape from your soul all kindness that possesses you and give it away to the ones who need you. If you remain generous, time will come good, and you will find your wings again on new breezes of promises, parcelled up in small little boxes. That was Kindness in COVID by Esther Kivuva.
Beautiful philosophy.
Absolutely, and how much better everything would be if we could actually give away kindness whenever it possesses us. Yeah,
Well
absolutely.
done.
Yes, and again, I think it was a common theme across a number of the poems, that kind of that sense, which again, something which often comes more easily to children than to us as adults.
Yeah, why can't we hand
looking
the
at
world over
others.
to children?
Yeah, absolutely.
Or young people.
Esther, give over for PM. So thank you, Esther, for that, and indeed to all our entrants into the pandemic poetry competition. The next category now, we start to get, thank you very much, Finn. Congratulations to the winners. Amazing poems. We've got a number more to go through now. So we now move into the category of 14 to 16 years. And one of the things that becomes really evident amongst a lot of the poems that came through in these older age groups was then a sense of, I suppose, anxiety of the pressures that were coming to bear during the time of the pandemic. So our winners in this category were Hannah Griffiths with Uncontrolled and Kazim Rafiq Fazal with Unseeming Dread. So what I'll do now is read out both the poems, beginning with Hannah's Uncontrolled. They said 2 weeks. They lied. I don't leave my bed. The cotton covers whisper sweet promises of relief. I'm not lazy, I promise. I'm just afraid. I'm afraid that the blue mask over my face will stitch itself from the bridge of my nose to the dip in my chin. Tight, unspeakable knots. A gentle asphyxiation. I'm afraid that the poisoned air will seep under the doorway through the crack of the window pane, searching for me. So I run. I run from the inescapable screens. I fear their hands, for they hold my life. I fear their thoughts, for they invade my own. I'm tired, but I don't sleep. If I do, I don't dream. I've seen too many nightmares in the daytime, each one unprecedented. I don't want to speak. I don't want to see. I don't want to stir. I can't muster the strength to face these daunting thoughts, to quiet the voice that silently screams death. It's all-consuming, embedding itself in the drums of my ears. I fear the man sitting a short distance away from me, his stumbled walk, his white complexion, the scratched clearing of his throat. That scraping sound, an alarm invading my senses. They said that we were safe. They lied. So as you can see, a very different tone that starts to enter in the poems as we move into this older
I mean, that
category.
really captures the anxiety and the fear that was part of, and still is part of,
yes,
of this situation. And I think that's important to express darker feelings in poems as well as celebration. I would imagine that would give a lot of comfort to people, because they could say, oh, that's how I felt.
Yes. Yeah. It's not just something that's isolated to you. It's something very much that's shared. So coming on now, again, some similarities of theme to Kazim Rafiq Fazal's poem, Unseeming Dread. A long time it has most certainly been since the dreaded wheel of 2019. Anguish, torment, death, endless to follow, such torture, such pain, it leaves us hollow. Hidden like rats riddled from every life, our minds broke down as they succumbed to strife. Do we indulge the hope that reappears? Plentifully, yes, until darkness nears. The slender hands of the puppeteers control us and cackle, their mouths in sneers. I
love that line, the slender hands of the puppeteers, you know,
yes.
that feeling of powerlessness that has been part of the pandemic, and who's controlling this and what can I do? It's a great image.
Yes. I mean, it's also this is interesting as well, because this was one of the poems that was kind of much more traditional in its form, and that's something I just wanted to draw attention, that, you know, there were lots of people experimenting with lots of different styles, from kind of haiku, from sort of sonnets, from traditional quatrains, but then also some, you know, sort of verse libre, free verse, and much more experimental approaches. So it was, again, it was great from my perspective to see sort of the entrance experimenting with these very different forms of poetry.
Well, poetry has many rooms, you know.
It absolutely does.
There's many ways to write
Yes.
a poem.
Yes.
It doesn't have to rhyme.
And we're moving now on to the last category. So these were poems that came through in the age range of 17 to 18 years. I just want to say as well, please keep the comments coming. It's great to see people sharing, you know, sort of congratulate us for the winners. That's absolutely,
right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really heartwarming, and we'll go through some of those comments later on, as well as questions about the poems, and for Carol Ann and myself as well. So the winners in the category of 17 to 18 years were Bethany Rose with Isolated, and Isabel Stokes with The Secrets of a Yearning Heart. And what I'll do is I'll read both of these poems, and then what we'll do is come back to the overall winner of our competition. So Bethany Rose with Isolated. 3 weeks, we were told, before this lockdown took hold. Now we're 3 months in with no sight to the end. Isolated and alone. Our only friend is our phone, no family to see, and without a spending spree. Countless hours on our own in this little place we call home. God, this is a truly deafening tone. Ring, ring, do I answer the phone? Your test results are in, negative. I let out a sigh of relief. And just when I thought it was the end, 6 more weeks. Am I going insane? What is going through my brain? I miss my friends, but I know it's not long until we see each other again. I'm counting down the days. Not long, I tell myself. Not long until I see you again.
Yeah, I know the feeling. How long, how long? Yeah, there's a real kind of edge and sort of angry bite to that, which I think is very successful.
Yes. And again, it's one of those things you sort of talk about, the sort of like those feelings of kindness, then the ones of kind of anguish or a kind of anxiety, and now, yeah, the anger that so many people have been feeling over the past year and a half now. Since
I mean, the music of being human, lots of different musics here.
Yes, and all those different emotions. And Dookie Go and Esther, you're a star. We are so proud as well. So again, thank you for the comments that are coming through. But yeah, that from Bethany Rose, Isolated. So I now bring up the second winner in the category for 17 to 18-year-olds. And this is Isabel Stokes. And her poem is The Secrets of a Yearning Heart. I dreamt that I hugged you today. Your scent lingered in my hair, talcum powder. I could feel your fingers curve around my waist, desperately clinging on. Our muffled sobs echoed throughout the room, tightly, tighter, tight. I wish I could hug you. I dreamt that I hugged you yesterday, your warm embrace, condensation trickling down my cheeks. That soft cardigan of yours always was my favorite. Squeezing, squeeze. I miss you. I dreamt that I hugged you. The image was hazy. My former self dangled on the precipice of the past. Fleeting. So much. I dreamt. The sheet of glass was absent. No latex, no mask, no soap. I hugged you. I will hug you. A vacant memory of how it used to be, now filed away into the depths of my memory. Not long now. Time sniggers at me.
God, that's amazing. What a great last line.
Yes.
I
mean, slowly building up to that.
Kind of malevolent verb, isn't it? And I love the intimacy of the cardigan and the talcum powder. It reminds me of hugging your grandmother or something. It's really
Yes.
lovely.
Yes. I mean, sort of picking out those really everyday little details, but then condensing them into this wonderful poem.
Mm.
And I think, Freddie, you just added, sort of, to thank you for all these talented poets. And that's actually, that's very much something that's very much in evidence. I mean, there's some wonderful poems that were sent through. But what I'd like to do now is then move on to the winner of the overall poems, and then return to some of the comments that people have been adding, as well as then perhaps any questions that you may have for Carol Ann and myself.
Yeah.
So
sorry, you're going to announce it, yeah.
I was going to. Oh, actually, no. I shall pass over to you, Carol Ann, because you're going to read out the winning poem as well.
Yeah, I have the poem, but I don't have the name of the poet.
So the winner, the overall winner of the University of Lincoln Pandemic Poetry Competition for 2021, the keen listening amongst you will have realised that one poem we skipped over, and this is because we're now going to return to it, and that is Elif Sensu's "If You Look Closely," and Carol Ann will be reading out the winner of our competition for this year.
So I was given a significant shortlist, including all the poems we've heard, and asked to pick the poem that I suppose is my favourite, really. And it was very difficult because, as we've heard, they all had something fantastic about them. But in the end, I picked this one. I love the simplicity of it. I love the way it uses a quite direct repetition, and it has a lovely musical lyric quality to it. If you look closely, it's still the same moon I would have gotten you. The same moon where you would freeze and take my jacket and lean. The same moon where the coffee would spill over the bond we shared. The same moon where I begged you were part of my story, just like in the book we once read. The same moon where now I feel my toes curl in the cold sand, missing your warm embrace. Gorgeous.
That was absolutely beautiful. I mean, all the poems that we've been reading tonight, as you say, they all had something incredible to contribute, but there's just such a beautiful sensibility that was coming through in that particular poem. So the winner.
Repetition's very, very important in poetry. Particularly if we were learning poem by heart, this would be one that you could very easily learn by heart, and quite rightly. And I'm a bit of a sucker for poems with the moon in, I have to say. Yes.
And it's actually one thing that I think came through when you were reading it, but people wouldn't perhaps have, you can see very clearly, is just that the simplicity of this poem. I mean, I think for me is that when you look at it and then hear it read out, it's just a series of small lines, short lines that slowly build up. As I say, this repetition, this building up of very simple images that are incredibly profoundly moving.
Well done.
Yes. I've been saying to everybody, I mean, the comments that are coming in are sort of congratulations from people. I particularly, sort of people for Nan's, granddad's, parents, friends and family.
Brothers, I've seen a few brothers.
Absolutely. So sort of, it's really the one that's just popped here. Congratulations to everyone, amazingly talented people. It's kind of something that's particularly important. I think that one of the things that we very often forget, I mean, a couple of the poems were drawing attention to the fact that, we're all locked to our phones in this day and age, but it's actually that moment to sit back and kind of reflect on the emotions, the experiences that we're having, that human music, as Carol's referred to it several times. This is something for me that, poetry is one of the oldest activities that we have, and it's still as important now as it ever has been to us. So it's really wonderful for the number of people that engaged with this and entered into the competition.
Yeah, and it's inspiring as well. I mean, I feel that young people have probably had the worst of of this experience we've gone through, that their education's been, you know, severely derailed. They haven't been able to see their friends. Just unimaginable kind of suffering young people have had. But to know that people are still being creative, producing work, all the ideas and philosophies that those poems contained is really heartening. So, yeah, I'm just in awe of them all.
I also just want to draw attention because some of the comments that are popping up at the moment, Mrs. Benson, who I presume from the comments was a teacher for Elif, our winner. So a very proud English teacher. As somebody who also spends a great deal of his time teaching English and creative writing, it's wonderful when you actually feel that somebody is responding to what you're trying to teach in the classroom as well. So I think, you know, behind the scenes as well, I'd also extend my thanks to all of you who are teaching English, particularly at a time when sometimes it feels particularly an unloved subject. And actually, it's something that I say that I think there's a natural tendency for lots of young people, but for children, to want to write poetry and to engage with it. So my thanks to you as well, Mrs. Benson, as well as obviously to Elif for her wonderful contribution to this competition.
Behind every great writer is a great English teacher.
And it's just Mrs. Benson, you're an amazing English teacher. So there it is. Yes. And we've had some fantastic poetry this evening. So again, thanks to everyone who's been involved. I'm just now for time for any questions that people may have. Obviously, in terms of the poems that we've just read, but also then here's one that's coming up. It'll pop up in the screen at the moment. Who was your favourite teacher, Prof. Whitaker and Carol Ann? I'll start off with you, Carol. Actually.
Gosh, I had lots of favourite teachers. My first favourite teacher was called Mrs. Tilsher when I was in junior school, and I've actually written a poem about her, which you can find in my collected poems. It's called "In Mrs. Tilsher's Class," and it's written about being in her class. I think I would have been in year 6, as they now call it. So she was fantastic, and she typed up my poems for me when I was 11. And then in big school, I had a wonderful teacher called Miss Scriven, who was a kind of prime of Miss Jean Brodie figure. She's quite eccentric, but passionate about poetry. And we became great friends. In fact, I read my poem at her funeral, and I don't think I would have been a poet without particularly her encouragement. So Mrs. Tilsher, Miss Scriven, and Mrs. Benson.
Excellent. I've got a lot of favourite teachers as well, but the one I'm just going to share this evening was actually my first teacher. So I went to a good Catholic school, good Catholic boy, at least for a time.
Me too.
And my first teacher was a nun called Sister Irene, who just let me paint all the time. And I still, from the age of 5, I still have the fondest memories of her. And down the line, although I gave up painting in the end, it inspired a love for William Blake for me. So I still have a soft spot for Sister Irene. We've got another question coming up now. So, most difficult moment in your what's the most difficult moment in your life that has perhaps inspired you to do what you do? That's from Finn.
Well, I suppose for me, when my mum died, I found that I couldn't write for a couple of years. And then at the end of that period, I wrote a poem called Premonitions, which was about my mother. So there was the incident of bereavement, and then this long period of silence, and then the gift of this poem at the end of it.
And actually, the next question is very much directed towards you, Carolyn. Out of the poems that you've written, which one is your favourite?
Mm.
not an easy question to answer, actually, as we were discussing previously.
I suppose I have two answers. My favourite is always the one I'm currently working on, because when you write a poem, you're completely absorbed and involved in the creation of it, and also grateful to be writing one. Every poem feels like writing the first, in a sense. So it'll be the one I'm currently working on. And then if I had to pick one, it would be a poem called A Child's Sleep, which is in one of my children's, no, it's in my collected children's poetry, actually, if you wanted to find it. And that's about watching my daughter sleeping when she was a toddler or a baby. So that's my all-time favourite poem.
Thank you. The next question coming up is actually one I can't answer immediately, but I'm very glad that somebody asked this. So it's by Black Knights. When will the next poetry competition be? What theme do you think will get the best response from even more amazing poets? Now, we haven't discussed yet when the next poetry competition will be, but I'm very glad to see that there's such enthusiasm for it. And also then it's definitely something that I think we will follow up, because I'm just always so pleased when people engage, as they do in these kind of competitions. People want to write poetry, and I think it's not just the competition, people naturally want to write poetry. So it's kind of my get out of jail free answer to this is going to be watch this space, and that we will be returning with many more competitions of this nature. What theme do you think would get the best? Actually, I will pass that one over to you, Carol. What theme do you think we should set?
Oh God, you could have some. I think the way things are going and the passion and interests of young people, I think it should be a green environmental theme, because we really need to be addressing that in our poetry as well as in our politics.
Yes, okay. Thank you. So watch this space for the next University of Lincoln poetry competition. And we now have a question from Kirsty Jane. What advice would you give to someone just starting to write poetry? Where should I look for inspiration?
I always give the same answer to this, which is read. I think if you want to do something, you have to do it by learning and imitation. I had 4 younger brothers, and they were all crazy about football, but they couldn't have played football unless they watched it and they knew the rules and all those kind of things. And it's exactly the same for poetry. You need to read a lot of it, and then start by imitation. Maybe find a form that you like. Jason was talking about form earlier. You might fancy trying your hand at a haiku or a sonnet, and it's by building up those skills that you can flower into being yourself as a writer.
Thank you. Somebody from the university is actually suggesting, and people might want to type this into the chat as well, what competition themes would people generally like us to do? So if you have suggestions for themes, please do type them in. I'm going to go back as a comment from Finn. Shout out to the Eco Warriors. They look up to Kazim Rafiq Fazal for inspiration. And then a question from Jason. Oh, well, it's under Jason, but it's hi, I'm Trinity. I would like to ask you where you got your inspiration for war photographer. Your writing style is amazing.
Oh, thank you, Trinity. I was just reading that poem earlier on. There's a great war photographer still alive. He's probably in his early 80s now, called Don McCullen, whom I used to know many years ago. And the poem is based on conversations I had with him in the early 1980s. And you can find out about Don McCullen by watching the documentary, which is simply called McCullen. and he's also done many books of his photographs as a war photographer. So yeah, Don McCullin. I think maybe one more question, then I have to go.
So yeah, so we have one actually. So why did you write Education for Leisure? Did you think it would be controversial? And that's from Benevolent Bog.
Yes, it ended up being controversial, didn't it, that poem, because it was banned from AQA syllabus. But no, I wrote it again in the 1980s when Margaret Thatcher's government was responsible for lots of cuts in education and the arts. And it's in the voice of a young person who is without hope, without prospects. So it's quite a political poem in that sense. But I didn't imagine sort of 25 years later that it would be controversial. No. But I think it had to be written at the time.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Thank you all for your questions, but I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Carol Ann for joining us this evening, and also very much for being the judge in our competition. But most of all, I want to thank all the entrants into the pandemic poetry competition that we ran this year, and especially then just to remind you of our winners: Edward Lammas, Abigail Silcox, Esther Kavuva, Elif Sensu, Hannah Griffiths, Kazim Rafiq Fazal, and then Bethany Rose and Isabel Stokes. Thank you to all our young poets. Thank you to everybody who entered into the competition. And thank you all for coming along this evening to listen to this. And also for those who are just saying thank you to myself and Carol Ann. We hope that you continue to be inspired to read and write and produce your own poetry. Thank you all very much.
And congratulations.
Congratulations indeed.